You've got big projects to tackle, but your day gets swallowed up by repetitive tasks and constant inquiries. It's hard to make progress when you're stuck putting out fires. That's where Element 451's AI assistants come in. Acting like an extra set of hands, you get your time back for the high-impact projects. Ready to reclaim your time? Visit element451.com/AI team to learn more.
Welcome to the Hired Geek Podcast, where each week we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experiences. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify podcast network, a robust collection of shows designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Welcome, everyone, to another wonderful episode of the Hired Geek Podcast. Following along, a lot of amazing guests as we're kind of winding down this year's season. It is a treat and an honor for me to have our guest here with us today to kind of, again, just help me process from a lot of different kind of vantage points and perspectives, all the stuff that has been going on, try to read the tea leaves of what is to come before the year is done. If you want to introduce yourself to everyone, give a brief overview of your professional background, and then we'll get into the rest of our conversation, kind of talking about all the stuff that you're working on and just perspectives on the trend lines that we're seeing.
Sure thing. Well, first of all, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Eloy Ortiz Oakley, President and CEO of the College Futures Foundation here in California. We're a private foundation focused on improving economic mobility for underserved students here in California through the power of post-secondary education. I've been with the foundation now, CEO, for a little over 2 years, and before that, I was Chancellor of the California Community Colleges for about 6 years, spent about 8 years on the University of California Board of Regents, and also did a stint as a senior advisor to Secretary Miguel Cardona in the Biden administration. And so I've been in higher education a long time and happy to be here.
You have just a lot of different things that you're doing now and also that you have done in the past. So that's kind of I want to just farm from your experience and perspective and your work and everything. And I guess, just you mentioned the College Futures Foundation. If you want to just kind of dig a little bit deeper on kind of the work that you're doing there, your team there, just some examples of how that's kind of taking shape, I guess, over the 2 years that you've been with that organization.
Sure. We firmly believe at College Futures that learners who want to access the new economy that's being built, learners who want to access, the California dream and more broadly the opportunities that exist throughout America, post-secondary education is an important part of that. And it's not just accessing post-secondary education. It's not just getting a credential or a degree. It is actually coming to fruition with that promise of, if you get your post-secondary education, that economic mobility follows. And that hasn't always been true. And we've seen that a lot in the polling that's been done across the country of learners. Less and less learners believe that higher education is that pathway. Less and less learners have confidence in that pathway, and largely because of how exclusionary our post-secondary system has been, how costly it has become, how much debt it's being accumulated. So we here at College Futures want to ensure that, learners who are accessing these post-secondary pathways, that they get a fair return on their investment. And we want to give them as much information as possible. And we want to put pressure on policymakers and institutional leaders to ensure that, all the money isn't spent on the recruiting part or the marketing part. We're actually leaning out, helping these learners access the kind of jobs that will allow them to have a really good return on their investment. learners are putting a lot of money up front, a lot of time, a lot of energy. They deserve that return on investment. And we want to see more and more of those low-income learners, first-generation learners, learners of color, do well, not just by getting access to post-secondary education, but what happens beyond that, and ensuring that as this skill economy continues to develop, they have access to the skills that they need to continue to improve their livelihood.
Yeah, there was so much work, I think, over the past several years around like that access point and sort of like the messaging, the marketing, and trying to like kind of widen the funnel and the tent of higher education to say like everyone is welcome. Like we're trying to really, like get everybody into the door, and that now it's sort of swinging towards like, we do need to kind of like, the student experience and sort of reform the structures of higher education to be, enabling success and enabling completion, and what is the curriculum and the skills and those sort of things. So, like, I guess just sort of your take on that idea that, like, trying to balance. It sounds like you're doing, I guess, like your fair share of like, we do have to kind of try to make sure the messaging and the marketing of higher education, kind of maintaining the relevance, but the idea that like maybe we need to put more of our emphasis on like the student experience, the outcomes, and sort of reforming what higher ed traditionally, the shape that it has taken for, centuries really at this point.
Well, the way I look at it is probably less of a pendulum swing than a continued evolution of what we should expect from our post-secondary system. And I say post-secondary because, it includes not just our higher education infrastructure, colleges, universities, technical colleges, but also all the third-party intermediaries that are involved in post-secondary education, the various credentialing platforms that exist, the online offerings, the boot camps. All these things are centered around improving skill acquisition for the learner. This is definitely, a skill-based economy. Skills are the currency today, and so ensuring that our learners have access to those skills is critically important. But I would also categorize it as, the next step. So 10, 12, 13 years ago, conversation was all around access and completion. And it's an example of California community colleges, which I'm very familiar with, achieve a lot of great things on the access spectrum. California community colleges are the largest system of higher education in the country, serving, when I was chancellor, up to 2.3 million students. So it's huge, but completion needed to become a greater emphasis. And those conversations, particularly in the early years of the Obama administration, really caught hold. We began to measure success differently in those years. We actually had conversations about completion, who's completing, who's not completing, why are they not completing. This is the next step. It's not just about completion. It is about, what does completion mean? What should it mean? How can we add another level of measure to the outcomes that a college, a university, an education provider, a skills provider should be held accountable to? In that, in my mind, and in many people's mind, is the economic outcomes of that post-secondary education. The Department of Education invested a lot of time and effort to create a database, to start talking about value. A lot of organizations, most recently the Wall Street Journal, published a new set of rankings around social mobility. We think that is the next step, the next logical step beyond completion. Completion to what end, and what is a learner actually paying for? That outcome needs to be front and center, in addition to all the great benefits of a higher education, which we all know very well. But for many, if not all, low-income learners, first-generation learners, the primary reason they go to college is to improve their economic mobility. And we need to take that seriously, and we need to measure it.
It is that idea that like everything else, all the sort of like emotional squishy stuff is sort of for naught, if it's like the personal growth through going through, higher education and the social capital and all that. But it's like, and I guess maybe not even like for naught. I mean, that's sort of like the worst case scenario, but it's maybe just sort of like hindered or hampered a bit if it is the idea that like, okay, the things that I learned, the skills, the credentials, or, certifications, whatever it might be, just like aren't taking me as far as they could or should. The idea that like, okay, cool. Yeah, like I was a history major. Like if I were going to a post-secondary institution today and being able to like get that degree, because it's like in my mind, like what that gives me is like understanding the context of which we all live and everything, the idea that like we're just living out the story of humanity. That is what history sort of like helps to like kind of build an appreciation for it, a more like, specific understanding of, whatever kind of flavor of history you study. But like if I could get out of college, graduating with a bachelor's degree in history, which, kind of carries its own weight, but also like certified in different like platform, like there's a lot of conversation, with the folks like Michael Horton, everybody, different thought leaders are really just trying to like encourage institutions to really try to bake in and build in all these other things that can help me, who are like, I would have the critical thinking skills and different things that are like, part of that sort of squishy mix. But then it's also just like, okay, the marketplace understands if you like are certified at HubSpot or Salesforce or whatever else, like that is just it's the same sort of like transactional thing of having like a bachelor's degree, which it's like now we're seeing that like the weight or the importance of that is starting to erode. And it's like, it is kind of that idea of like, okay, there's other stuff that could be sort of a barometer of like, okay, you are going to be an effective member of our team that has certain skills, and that's what we're looking for. And you're going to be a good, team player, a good communicator, all those sort of things. So yeah, that idea of like, all right, like we're at a point where it's like, great, you got your 4-year degree, or, you got your associates or whatever it might be. It's kind of like, okay, so what? Like, what else? Or what else you got for me? Like how can we sort of really capture the full breadth of what is being learned with sort of like the current state of, curriculum at these institutions, but also try to just like, get as much out of that time. Like that's such a kind of pivotal time. There's so much potential while, you are a student, you kind of have that license or sort of have that freedom to be, yeah, just gathering up all these skills and certifications and things. And it can just like, yeah, just really optimize your outcomes, when you kind of get out on the other side. But obviously, you're a very thoughtful, very passionate, very invested, committed person into higher education and workforce development and all these things. You are a fellow podcaster. If folks aren't aware, you have your own show called The Rant. So that obviously speaks to me and warms my heart. Folks who are jumping in the arena and having these conversations with folks and everything.
Michael Horn was also my guest. So we
exactly. That's what it's like. I always try to like, follow people around where it's just like, oh, Michael's over there. Like I want to hear these two people talk and everything. So I'm just curious, I think just from somebody in your position, obviously, like, again, you have such a rich background and experience and perspective and everything. Like, how did your podcast come to be? Like, what was sort of like, the catalyst for you getting started, sort of jumping into the content creation arena with your podcast?
The podcast has become my opportunity to chat with good friends that I've made over the years and to talk about issues that I care about. So it's a chance to connect with people that I know and respect and value their point of view, which in some cases may be a little different than my point of view. I think Michael Horn's a great case in point. Michael and I don't agree on everything, but we agree on a lot of things, wanting to see the same outcome. So I think having those conversations and letting people hear those conversations hopefully helps the discussion across the country about things that should matter to all of us, which is ensuring that we have an educated populace, ensuring that we create opportunities. And to me, that's sort of what it's all about. Higher education in America has not been equitable. In no way, shape, or form has it been democratized. There's still a lack of opportunity. And higher ed has been more of a gatekeeper rather than a place for opportunity for everyone. And we want to change that. So I began down this road as chancellor. We started our own podcast, talked about the California community colleges and, debunk a lot of myths about community college, talk to some great alumni in community colleges. And then it just sort of went from there. And now it's just a chance for me to get things off my chest, and a chance for me to reconnect with people doing great work across the country and be able to talk about that in ways that other people can listen to and can always come back to that conversation at any point in time.
it's such a beautiful medium. Having this, like, Hired Geek, it's always there for me. Like, if I changed jobs
Right.
and everything over the years, but it's like always this sort of outlet to have these conversations and like build my learning and my network and everything. But like that idea that it kind of captures that magic of like, if you're at a conference or something and if you're like waiting in line for something or whatever, be like, oh, hey, like I know you, or I follow you on like LinkedIn or social media or something else. Like, you have these conversations of just sort of like, a lot of these like podcasts that I love, it's like, they're maybe on like the shorter side where it's just like, yeah, I'd love to hear these two just talk about things like that are going on right now. And, just kind of capturing that magic of like what happens at like a conference and panels and those sort of things. So I do appreciate you, making yourself available and sort of having that outlet and everything. And because I think that idea that like
a lot of things bug me in higher education, so it gives me a chance to rant about them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's like, I guess, the title just sort of coming to you, I'm sure we're just like, oh, that is like too perfect of a title for a podcast. Like, because like that idea that you, like you said, it's like folks that you have maybe worked with or, just in similar circles and everything, like you're so well connected. And I think it's that idea that like, I have just a very diverse diet of like, hired podcasts and a bunch of other ones that I listen to. But the folks where it's like, I'm listening to like, certain episodes of like of yours or Future You or whatever else, like more often than not, because it's just like, yeah, I really want, their sort of perspective on things to help me process as I'm like reading all the articles from my newsletters and, whatever else. So I think it is such an important ingredient of, the kind of work that you are doing day to day, that idea of like advocating for reform and trying to, just really keep driving kind of the conversations forward and, trying to equip, folks who are like policymakers to be able to hopefully fully understand, appreciate all the nuances and complexity and things, and the idea that like, yeah, we're all trying to get to like, obviously like, doing right by students, getting them the best outcomes, economic outcomes that we can. There are certainly a lot of ways to do that. And we do need to try to like, kind of bring everybody to the table, and it's going to take all of us doing all these different types of approaches and everything to get there. So I think it is important to try to like shine a light and be like, well, they're doing it this way and that's having some success, and they're doing this over here. And then somebody else listening can be like, well, yeah, I want to take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and put it together. And we're going to, take a crack at it here and see what we can do, in our organization. So I'm always just like such a like strong advocate for as many people to like be guests on shows and to like have shows and to like, do all this stuff. So it's all good things. And currently just looking through your LinkedIn, if anybody peruses it, they will see, as I did, that you're like a board member and advisor for a lot of different organizations. So obviously that's kind of, in the mix and informing your perspective and, the conversations that you're having in your podcast and everything. I'm just curious, I guess, if you can sort of just try to capture a bit of like, the insights that you're gaining, from all these like different perspectives and involvements that you have, because it's a lot of, some big names kind of in the ed tech or just broader education world. And I feel like it is probably such a privilege and an amazing opportunity to at least be able to kind of like, have kind of some insight into like what they're working on and how you can kind of support that, or just sort of like, obviously like just the higher ed ecosystem is so big. So the idea, I guess, that you're getting sort of that opportunity to see so much of what's going on. So I guess any insights or reflections from all these sort of advising roles and stuff that you have right now.
So, I mean, I can only speak for me. I mean, the different opportunities that I've been able to engage with just give me insights into different ways of trying to tackle what I see is the issue or the problem, and the issue being giving more people across this country, regardless of their background, access to information, to education, to opportunity. That, at the end of the day, is what it's all about for me. So if I'm engaged in, I have worked in the public sector for almost more than half of my life, so I know the public sector very well. Our community college system, the regional university system, the Research One public university system. So I know those very well, and I stay engaged with those. I'm still, even though I'm not on the Board of Regents anymore, I'm still a trustee for the University of California, Irvine, so that keeps me involved. But I also wanted to extend my experience into the nonprofit sector. So I'm on the board of Western Governors University, fully online, doing excellent work serving adult learners, nonprofit, created for a specific purpose. So that gives me insights on that operating model. And then I also am doing work for a for-profit university, Alliant International University, which is focused on graduate programs, particularly professional graduate programs. And so while I can sit on the sidelines and say, the for-profit model is terrible, it's difficult for me to comment on it if I've never had any experience with how a for-profit business model works. So that's why I chose to work with Alliant. And Alliant has had a very good reputation of serving learners. It has a very low rate of indebtedness for its learners. It has a very high ROI for its graduates. So having the three experiences, I think, helps me approach the issue in a more diverse way. It gives me different ways of thinking about it. And likewise, a lot of third-party intermediaries. I mean, there is huge growth in technology and education technology. Third-party intermediaries trying to solve this, everything from the work that I do with skilled education, and they act sort of as a broker, as a supporter of employees, helping them access learning in Fortune 500 companies that care about their employees, wanting to gain a higher level degree. So, and I can just go on, but for me, I think it makes me a better observer, gives me a better insight as to how I should approach a solution set. Without those experiences, I wouldn't be able to bring to the table. So for me, I'm a higher ed geek. This is my life. This is what I do 24/7 all the time. So for me, it comes natural to want to learn more about different ways of approaching the issue. And it also gives me a chance to be able to be more critical of a nonprofit organization or a for-profit organization or a public organization. So for all those reasons, that's why I get involved with the variety of organizations that I do.
Hey folks, Dustin here. Element 451 is hosting the AI Engage Summit on October 29th and 30th. This free virtual event features many of your favorite Enrollify creators and will explore AI's impact on student engagement, enrollment marketing, and institutional success. Learn how to tap into the power of AI to turn data into actionable insights, utilize predictive analytics, and monitor and support student performance. Plus, hear directly from current students on how AI is influencing their engagement in campus life. The AI Engage Summit is your guide to understanding and applying AI at your school. Registration is free. Just visit element451.com to save your spot. Now, back to the show. You're in good company here, fellow hired geek, and I appreciate you accepting that moniker and that mantle. As you were saying that idea of getting involved with a for-profit university, in that capacity to at least just sort of learn and observe and all that, and you kind of test your assumptions. Because I will fully admit, because obviously they've just for the for-profit sector in higher ed being kind of put through the ringer, and rightfully so. Right. They were not delivering for students and everything, and I think that's sort of for me, put this sort of residue of sort of a knee-jerk bias of just sort of coloring them all sort of, where it's oh, they're all garbage, they're all, whatever. And it's I think now at least that sector getting a lot more accountability, the players who are still there, presumably, are doing better by students and doing everything else. So it's okay, well, let's see how they're doing that approach. Because like you're saying, I mean, if you are so and only immersed in sort of the bubble of public institutions, it's you are sort of limiting the extent of the different approaches and solutions and ways that people are approaching this work, because public institutions do have to kind of stay in a certain lane. So it's the idea that you can, really, really broaden your perspective, I think is, certainly good on you for doing that. And I think, as much as other folks have that sort of opportunity and everything, I think, it's going to be something that is going to be required for kind of the modern higher ed leader, is to have a fuller appreciation and sort of breadth of experiences or things, or just sort of maybe going to that that summit, or that that event that is maybe a bit more of a cross-pollination of people that aren't just sort of your direct peers. It's obviously that's great. Go to that event that is for other people who are chancellors of public institutions in your region or whatever, like you all are going to be like dealing with the exact same issues, but it's like also maybe try to get out your comfort zone a little bit, like get exposure to different things. Cause like I love those spaces where it's like South by Southwest ADU, where it's like kind of by design, this sort of like collision and collider of all of these different people that kind of coexist in the education space and, K through 12 and higher ed alike. So, yeah, I think, just a good, at least little anecdote or sort of, nudge for folks, I guess, to hopefully kind of test their assumptions and biases and all that. Certainly one part of this mix, obviously, like, and you mentioned, obviously, wanting to try to work with policymakers or sort of encourage them to, whether it's maybe from local, state, or federal level, to create kind of structures that are more conducive to enabling student success and kind of good outcomes. You had that advisory capacity a few years ago with Secretary Cardona. As a geek, I guess, like I've not really had somebody who's been able to kind of like peek behind the curtain a little bit. Like, I guess just what how that experience came about. What was it like? But I think like we're obviously in election year. We're recording this in September. The administration is going to change one way or another next year. But like the federal government, I feel like has been so stifled and muddled with like higher ed policy as of late. So I guess like just speaking holistically to the experience that you had, what that was like, but just sort of any like perspectives on how you feel like the federal government's role in higher ed could or should take shape, as time goes on here.
Assuming Project 2025 does not eliminate all the federal government's role in education, which I think would be a catastrophe, then yes, there is a very important role for the federal government in higher education, particularly. I'll just focus on higher education because you could do a whole podcast just on the K-12 relationship. But my work's been in higher ed, and then that's where I spent my time in the Biden administration helping support what was then the Build Back Better agenda for higher education. And it's interesting you use the term "get behind the curtain." That is exactly the tagline for my podcast, Pulling Back the Curtain. Because a lot of people, don't understand the important relationships between the federal government and states. States are primarily responsible for higher education. The states heavily rely on the federal government, particularly when it relates to financing higher education. So the Pell Grant, the federal financial aid system is, they're one of the biggest lenders in the country. They could be considered one of the biggest lending banks in the country. So FSA, Federal Student Loan Administration, I mean, they are huge. They give a lot of aid, give a lot of loans. So it is enormously influential, particularly in the way that higher education is constructed in America, because it is the financing of higher education in America is largely a federal issue. It has become federalized. My good friend, Dr. Keaton Alexander, writes about this all the time. There's some pluses and definitely some minuses to that. So that's sort of the heart of the policy. Everything sort of flows from around that. So if you think about some of the topics today, like borrower defense, they all stem from this notion that if you're a Title IV eligible institution, that means that you're tapped into the main line, your institution gets access to aid, to federal dollars, then you should be accountable for that. And there's been a lot of policy built on what that should mean. This is a conversation that Michael Horn and I have had in the past, which is how do you maintain guardrails for institutions without stifling innovation? I think that is the trick. Some people have felt that this administration has gone a little too far. I think they've done remarkable work considering how much pressure they are from Congress. So if you think about the most recent issue, the FAFSA simplification implementation, yes, there's plenty of concern to go around. I think the department could have done a better job of implementing. But at the same time, I didn't see anybody raising their hand and saying, Congress didn't fund the Department of Education. So in some ways, Congress had a primary role in ensuring that there was failure in the Department of Education. So these are the complexities that come into existence. It's easy to just point your finger and say, yeah, they didn't do this one thing. But nobody stopped to think how badly the former Secretary DeVos had gutted the Department of Education, how there was very little infrastructure there when Secretary Cardona government took over and how very little funding come into existence to ensure that the rollout, the proper rollout, and the great work that was done by Congress to simplify the FAFSA actually got implemented. So there's so much behind the scenes that have such a huge impact on teaching and learning that I don't think we pay enough attention to. So to end my rant here, I'll say that this election is huge for those reasons, that we're either going to have an administration that puts at the center of their policy the kind of learners that I and my colleagues, my organization cares about, which is those learners that don't have the privilege and the generational wealth that will ensure that they get access to the finest education. If we go the wrong direction, then the learners that we care about are not going to have that access because they're not going to be prioritized, whereas the higher arts administration will prioritize them. So at least that infrastructure will be there. Is it perfect? No. I've not known a Department of Education that's got it exactly right, but their job is very straightforward to ensure that civil rights are maintained for learners across the country, that the aid that is allocated by Congress gets to the people who need it, and that we hold our institutions accountable for those resources, that learners are actually gaining access to the kind of skills that they were promised by those institutions. So for all those reasons, this election matters. I hope people take that into consideration. I don't think it's as easy as eliminating the Department of Education. I think work has to be done to improve the ability of more Americans to access low-cost, high-quality education. So I hope that they pay attention.
The stark contrast of the future of the Department of Education, depending on which administration comes in next year. Because I think, obviously, like it's not, the current Department of Education has not gotten many positive headlines lately, but like you said, it's like they're working in a context of like a lack of resources and everything. So I think that's always like a tough place to be in, is that like people are going to be like, oh, well, just like, like burn it all down. Like, look, they're ruining everything and all that. But it's like, well, actually we could achieve better outcomes if we had better resources. And that's, I'm sure, a tagline that any educator can appreciate. But like that idea of like, it's such a difficult paradigm of like, okay, well, you aren't doing enough or you aren't doing good enough. And it's like, well, I need more resources to do better. But it's like, well, you haven't done great with what you have now. Why am I going to give you more? And it's like, you have to try to like break that cycle and have some level of trust and like even like kind of a longitudinal kind of view, I get, like giving things time to kind of permeate and everything. So it's definitely like an interesting time, and even with like student loan stuff, because it's like you said, it's like it's become a dynamic where so much in federal dollars is going to higher education in general, and public institutions are less and less funded by their respective states, some more than others and everything. But like, so it is like, it's just a dynamic of, like all those sort of stipulations put on federal financial aid and everything, that dynamic has changed. And then we have to kind of, I guess, just figure out as sort of a country and, through Congress or whatever else, like, what will, like borrower defense or, student loan repayment, stuff like how is that going to look and everything moving into the future? Cause I feel like that's where my mind went, because I think that is something that just has, prior to the FAFSA stuff, like taken up so much of like the headlines is like, oh, like the Biden administration has forgiven so many loans, of like sort of reinitiating like public service loan forgiveness and everything else. And then like his other attempts to try to like reformat repayment plans and doing like stuff with student loans and everything, like those have just been hindered so much. And I think that's where I'm like, I'm sure like it is just so frustrating for so many people that like he's been sort of hamstrung in this way. And then it's like, okay, then the FAFSA rollout is sort of botched and everything. It's just like, they can't catch a break. But I think the idea of like, we cannot lose faith in the opportunity or the potential of like what the Department of Education can do, but also try to, I guess, maybe level set expectation of like, well, it can only do so much. Like there are, again, like so many different players in the higher ed ecosystem that need to be sort of, kind of working their respective gears and the whole sort of machine, I guess. So I think it's definitely stuff for folks to think about as we're approaching election day, or just sort of thinking about sort of how we're looking at sort of the accountability, or sort of like how are we going to think about funding the Department of Education in the future and everything. But as we wind down, because I mean certainly again we could geek out and rant about all this stuff for a long time, but we'll kind of try to bring us home here. Try to just sort of like summarize or just kind of capture like the advice that you would give to other higher ed leaders right now, because again it is no shortage of negative headlines or headwinds and complexities and just things changing and all that. But like, as you kind of sit here from your position and your perspective and your experiences and everything, advice that you would give to your fellow higher ed leaders right now.
My advice, be authentic and always keep your learners at the center of every decision you make. That sounds simple, but as we've seen from time and time again, we have higher ed leaders who show up on camera, who have been overly coached by their lawyers, and who say some things that just don't make any sense to the majority of Americans. And my advice is keep it simple. Higher education is about the people, first and foremost, their dreams, their aspirations, and it's about jobs. It's about helping people build generational wealth through accessing high quality, great education, becoming better citizens, becoming better informed, improving their communities, their states, the country, the world, one learner at a time. And not to get in front of your skis, focus on the institution you're in, focus on the mission of the institution. Far too many higher ed leaders want to be, they started out at community college, they want to replicate what's going on at their regional university. The regional university leader wants to be the R1 university, and the R1 university wants to be part of the Ivy Plus club, and that's just ridiculous. Focus on your mission, serve the learners that are in your community, and if you can do that, everything else will be gravy. So I think if more higher ed leaders just focus on those basics and keep it simple, more and more learners will have greater and greater confidence in their higher education institutions.
Yeah, some great words of wisdoms there, Eloy. And I think, the authenticity, the simplicity, student-centric, I think, like those just should be ringing in people's ears as they're thinking about their strategy and doing whatever it is that they're doing whenever they're kind of corner of the higher ed ecosystem and everything. So I think, that idea of like, I guess like authenticity, that's what's ringing out to me like the most. And like you said, like where we've seen like, higher ed leaders testifying in front of Congress and just sort of like frustrating people by sort of, it's just like, they're just not talking normal or authentically or genuinely. Right. And even just like, it's those sort of things, but even just the like, wherever you are, whoever you are, like as an institution, like sort of just embracing that and owning that in sort of an earnest way versus like, so like that sort of like authenticity too, like it's just that resonates with me a lot, I think. And because I think, that's the idea of like getting ahead of your skis and like you're spending all this money or, taking on debt as an institution to build some like, build a bunch of buildings or do whatever else. It's just like, focus in on like what that you are good at, what differentiates you and all that. Like, so I think, such great advice, very wise words. And I appreciate all that you do and all that you shared, and we'll have ways to connect with you and the podcast and College Futures Foundation and the description for the episode. But again, this is a treat for me. I appreciate you so much for coming on to the show here and sharing all of your great perspectives with our audience here.
Well, it's been great to join you, Dustin. Thanks for inviting me.
The Higher Ed Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances you'll like all the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing constantly, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help you find your next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from people like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Dave Kibbolds, and Eddie Francis, as well as so many other of your favorite leaders in higher education. Enrollify is made possible by the support of Element 451, a leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.